Good evening, I'm Rachel Maddow. Today, Ukraine stands closer than ever to joining the European Union, a shift that could transform its economy, governance, and role on the continent. For decades, Ukraine has navigated the delicate balance between looking west toward Europe and facing influence from Russia in the east. EU membership represents more than politics. It's a chance for economic growth, democratic stability, and alignment with like-minded neighbors. To understand why this moment matters, we need to consider Ukraine's journey through modern European history, its struggles for sovereignty, and the pivotal choices shaping its future today. Europe divided, the Cold War legacy. During the Cold War, Europe was divided between two systems. Western Europe developed market economies, democratic institutions, and cultures of cooperation, while Eastern Europe fell under Soviet control with state-dictated politics and economic activity. Ukraine, as a Soviet republic, had its political and economic direction determined by Moscow. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine gained independence, but it arrived with significant challenges: economic shocks, weak institutions, and pervasive corruption. Meanwhile, countries to Ukraine's west moved swiftly toward Europe. Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and the Baltic states embraced reforms, opened their markets, and prepared for EU membership, strengthening their economies, infrastructure, and democratic institutions. This growing contrast helped shape Ukraine's early aspirations toward Europe and explains why Russia perceived such moves as a threat to its influence. What the European Union is: to understand Ukraine's aspirations, it is essential to grasp what the European Union represents. Founded after the Second World War, the EU began as a practical solution to prevent future conflict, starting with cooperation in coal and steel industries. Over time, this expanded into a single market where goods, services, capital, and people move freely. EU members agreed on common legal standards, consumer protections, and environmental rules, while institutions like the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the European Court of Justice ensured fairness and stability. The EU provides access to the world's largest single market, strong legal protections, and educational opportunities across borders. For former communist states in Central and Eastern Europe, joining the EU accelerated economic growth, modernized infrastructure, and enhanced citizen mobility, offering a vision of what Ukraine could achieve. Ukraine's early challenges. Ukraine's path toward Europe was complicated. Corruption permeated key sectors, and powerful oligarchs exerted influence across industries and politics. Governments changed frequently, often consumed with internal conflicts rather than addressing national challenges. Russia, meanwhile, maintained a strong influence, using energy dependence and trade leverage to keep Ukraine within its orbit. Gas prices fluctuated with political decisions, trade restrictions targeted pro-European policies, and discounts were offered when leaders leaned toward Moscow. Despite these pressures, aspirations toward Europe persisted. Ukrainian students studied abroad, professionals compared opportunities in neighboring countries, and civil society advocated for reform. The Orange Revolution. In 2004, Ukraine experienced its first major confrontation between pro-European forces and pro-Russian influence during a disputed presidential election. Mass protests, known as the Orange Revolution, erupted in Kyiv as citizens demanded fair elections and accountable governance. Eventually, a new election brought a pro-European candidate to power, signaling the public's desire to choose their own direction. However, the challenges of corruption and economic instability persisted, and Russia continued to exert influence through energy and trade pressures, reminding Ukraine of the costs of independence. Renewed European integration. By 2010, Ukraine's trajectory shifted again under President Viktor Yanukovych, who leaned toward Moscow despite promising a balanced approach. Still, the EU continued its engagement, negotiating an association agreement that promised to modernize Ukraine's economy and bring it closer to European standards. The agreement represented a significant step, even if it fell short of full membership. Yet, In 2013, Yanukovych froze the process under Russian pressure, triggering widespread protests known as the Euromaidan movement. Citizens gathered in Kyiv demanding the right to choose their future, with crowds swelling to include students, professionals, and families. These protests reflected aspirations for dignity, independence, and alignment with European values. Russia's response and the conflict in eastern Ukraine. The ousting of Yanukovych in 2014 was a turning point. For Ukraine, it marked a clear choice for Europe, but for Russia, it represented a loss of influence. Soon after, Russia annexed Crimea and supported separatist movements in eastern Ukraine. This conflict shattered assumptions about European borders and underscored the risks associated with Ukraine asserting its independence. Despite the loss of territory and ongoing violence, Ukraine's resolve strengthened. Citizens rallied around a shared national identity that transcended language and regional divisions. Reforms under pressure. During this period, Ukraine pursued internal reforms while managing the challenges of war and economic instability. The conflict disrupted industries, particularly in the East, and forced the government to seek support from the IMF and the EU. In exchange, Ukraine committed to long overdue reforms, including anti-corruption measures, independent oversight institutions were established, and legal mechanisms were introduced to challenge entrenched oligarchic networks. These reforms, though difficult, began to shift the country toward transparency and accountability. The EU also granted visa-free travel in 2017, allowing Ukrainian citizens greater mobility across Europe and reinforcing the tangible benefits of alignment with European institutions, political change, and national unity. In 2019, Ukraine elected Volodymyr Zelensky, a former entertainer, who campaigned on unity, renewal, and an end to corruption. Despite initial hopes for renewed peace with Russia, it became clear that the conflict could not be resolved without addressing Russia's continued influence and military presence. The idea of a Ukraine aligned with Europe challenged long-standing regional power dynamics. The February 2022 invasion marked a definitive escalation, forcing Ukraine to defend not only its territory, but its right to determine its own path. EU membership as a strategic goal. Ukraine's application for EU membership and the subsequent granting of candidate status reflected both progress and recognition of the stakes involved. Reforms accelerated under wartime conditions, with Parliament enacting laws on public procurement, judicial independence, and transparency. Anti-corruption bodies gained authority, civil society monitored government actions, and legislative alignment with European norms advanced rapidly. These steps demonstrated Ukraine's commitment to meeting the standards required for membership despite ongoing conflict. Economic implications of EU integration. EU membership offers Ukraine access to the largest single market in the world, enabling free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. For Ukrainian businesses, this could mean increased exports, foreign investment, and economic modernization. Historical experience from Eastern European countries shows that integration can drive substantial growth, with GDP expansion, improved wages, and new industries emerging. For Ukrainian citizens, educational and employment opportunities would expand, providing pathways previously unavailable under the Soviet-era legacy or during periods of corruption and instability. Strengthening alliances and governance. Beyond economic benefits, EU membership formalizes Ukraine's ties with its closest allies. Participation in EU institutions would embed the country in a system governed by shared laws, coordinated policies, and joint decision-making. This institutional framework reduces opportunities for external interference and strengthens domestic governance. By adhering to clear rules, Ukraine can protect its political processes, promote transparency, and create a stable environment for businesses and citizens alike. Reducing external dependence. EU integration also reduces reliance on external powers for critical resources, particularly energy. Dependence on Russian gas had long shaped Ukraine's policies, but wartime conditions highlighted the risks associated with this reliance. Diversifying energy sources and integrating with European systems strengthens national security and economic independence. EU membership, therefore, is not only a political choice, but also a strategic measure to safeguard the country's future. The broader European context. Ukraine's path toward the EU is part of a larger story of European integration. Countries that have joined the Union have generally experienced higher levels of stability, stronger institutions, and improved economic outcomes. The enlargement of the EU has also served as a strategic tool for promoting peace, democracy, and cooperation across the continent. For Ukraine, joining the EU would place it firmly within this community, ensuring alignment with shared values and offering protection from coercive external pressures. Public support and regional impacts. Public opinion in Europe has shifted in favor of Ukraine's integration, reflecting recognition of its sacrifices and reform efforts. Countries that were once cautious now view Ukraine as a partner whose success strengthens regional stability. Within Ukraine, the war has fostered national unity and reinforced the desire for alignment with European norms. Citizens, civil society organizations, and the government have all contributed to advancing reforms, demonstrating that integration is both a popular and practical goal. Ongoing reforms and EU alignment. Even amid conflict, Ukraine has maintained a focus on institutional reform and legislative alignment with European standards. Laws governing judicial independence, public procurement, and transparency have been strengthened. Anti-corruption bodies are now empowered to act, and civil society monitors the implementation of these reforms. This dedication signals to the EU that Ukraine is serious about meeting membership criteria and is capable of sustaining progress despite extraordinary challenges. Geopolitical significance. Ukraine's integration into the EU carries important geopolitical implications. It diminishes the influence of external powers that have historically sought to sway the country's policies through energy dependence, trade, or political networks. By joining the EU, Ukraine solidifies a path toward rule-based governance, economic modernization, and strategic alliances with democratic neighbors. This outcome is a pivotal moment for Europe, as it demonstrates that post-Soviet countries can successfully pursue reform, integration, and self-determination. Conclusion: a future anchored in Europe. Ukraine's journey toward EU membership reflects decades of struggle, resilience, and ambition. From the early post-Soviet years of uncertainty to mass movements like the Orange Revolution and Euromaidan, the country has consistently demonstrated a desire to align with European values. The conflict with Russia has accelerated reforms, strengthened national identity, and highlighted the strategic importance of EU integration. Membership offers not only economic opportunities and governance improvements, but also security, stability, and a clear path for the country's future. For Ukraine, joining the EU is the culmination of a long-standing aspiration to fully participate in the European community, shaping its own destiny while contributing to a stable and prosperous continent.